read the presidents for about 10 minutes by themselves, so that way they can review and get ready for it. So if you want to pause the video and study as well, and that's why they're just, excuse me, that's what they're doing now, is they're just taking it. So you want to take it on a blank piece of paper once you finish studying, get out a blank piece of paper and a pen, label it 1 through 25, and then write the presidents in order. So write your name at the top so I'll know who you are. So if you can pause the video, go study for a little bit longer, you can, and then come back. It's going to be awkward silence for probably about 5 minutes. Remember, Jamie, I just need last names except for duplicates. If you need to draw arrows because you've got somebody, you draw it off to the side, that's fine. If you want to try to squeeze somebody in somewhere.
How to mark out one right here.
Yeah,
And
just
then just put this next to it for that one.
That's fine. So that's your answer for him? Okay. Do you need to write first name for that one? Just in duplicates? Just be quiet. Meditate. Pray. I hope so. I really do.
Look at that, that's great right here.
Sure? Okay, go ahead, get 2 seconds back, then go ahead and get your homework. And you. Alright, so let's 1 through 6, 361. Alright, what influence did Christian missionaries have among the Native Americans? Ethan.
I get a tissue, please.
You make a tissue. I'm sorry.
Missionaries helped preserve the North American Indians for a little longer.
Did what?
The missionaries helped preserve the North American Indians.
Okay, yes, because it helps
What's that?
out with them, like, preserve their culture. So that's the idea, it helps them not have as much tribal warfare. Alright, number 2. What named the first Black American or African American denomination? Who founded it? Quentin.
AME Church was first Black American denomination, which was founded by Richard Allen.
Good job. What was it? I
Was
couldn't read the math, I'm sorry.
Founded by Richard Allen.
What was it?
AME Church.
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
AME Church.
There you go. So, that's the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Alright, number 3. What is considered to be one of America's greatest contributions to the field of music? Alright? Yes.
In the bathroom?
Yes. Are you okay?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. We'll send someone to come check on you in about 5 minutes if you're not back. Okay, Genesis. Number 3. What is considered? Yep, the Negro spiritual. Number 5, what organization was established, number 4, what organization set up hundreds of missionary salesmen who traveled the country preaching the gospel and selling or giving away tracts and books? What were those men called? Alright, Chris.
The American Tract Society sent coal porters to give away tracts.
So, coal porters, those were basically like Bible salesmen. Now, again, we don't really do that today, but it is the idea of, okay, they would send out people to go sell Bibles and also to go witness as well. Alright, number 5. What organization was established to promote the founding of Sunday schools and published books and manuals? Alright, we'll start with you, Chris. We'll go backwards.
American Sunday School Union, promoted Sunday school.
Good job. And then number 6. What man single-handedly founded more than 1,300 Sunday schools in the Mississippi Valley? Genesis. Good job. Alright, and then you also had 1 through 8. So number 1, New America's first foreign mission board, and who helped found it? You okay?
Tasted like blood.
Alright. Okay, I'm glad you're okay. Alright, Quentin's turn.
The American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions was founded by St. Joseph Mills.
Good job. Number 2, what missionary pioneered the work in Burma became known as the father of American mission specifically? Alright, Ethan.
Judson was an evangelist as well.
Good job. Alright, Breckin, we'll let you take 2 since you were gone. So, number 3, what colony was established in Africa for freed slaves?
Liberia major free slaves.
Do you remember what the capital of Liberia is? Even though this isn't geography class, but I know you're taking it.
What is that?
F.
It starts with an F?
Liberia. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of something else for it. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Sierra Leone. Okay.
Start with an M.
Yeah, it does start with an M. I'm sorry, I was thinking of the wrong one.
I don't know.
Do you remember?
Start with an M.
Starts with an M. I was thinking of Sierra Leone, that's the one I was thinking of. That's the British one. It is
Monrovia?
Monrovia, good job. Alright, and then number 4, who were the first missionaries to Liberia? Your geography book also talks about this.
Lot Carey, Colin T.
Yep. Alright, number 5, what was the result of Commodore Perry's mission to Japan? We'll just jump to Genesis.
The opening of Japan.
Good job. The missionaries began to spread the gospel as well. Alright, number 6, what treaty opened Japan to Christian missionaries? Chris, we'll just jump to you.
The Treaty of Amity and Commerce opened Japan up.
Great job. Number 7, who discovered white and where and when did the first American missionaries arrive? Ethan.
James Cook discovered Hawaii, missionaries arrived in 1820.
Good job. And number 8, describe several ways that Hawaii changed as a result of the efforts of Christian missionaries. Quentin.
Hawaii developed an alphabet and put language into a written form.
Sorry, just gonna pick up the math. What's the second part? So I got the developed an alphabet.
They put the language into a written form.
Okay.
They sent out missionaries.
Yeah, and then within 50 years of their own being basically exposed to Christianity, they start sending out their own missionaries. Alright, you go ahead and put that away and get out your textbooks. I don't know if we have enough time to really play a review game or anything right now. Maybe at the end if we have time, but I gotta get through a lot of stuff. So make sure you are reviewing and staying on top of it on your own. Alright, so we left off talking about the Whigs and the Whigs coming to power. Who was the president who was the candidate for the Whigs that ended up actually winning? Anyone remember? Yep. Nope.
What's that?
Started with an H.
Harrison.
Harrison. Now keep in mind, what's special about Harrison that you need to know?
He died.
Okay, so first Harrison, what happened to him?
He died.
He died. Why?
Because he was
He got pneumonia.
Yeah, he got pneumonia. He wasn't
Pneumonia.
assassinated.
Pneumonia.
He was
Pneumonia.
Yeah, so he wanted to look,
ignorant.
yeah, well, he wanted to look basically, he didn't want to look weak and feeble, like wearing a coat in the rain, but then he ended up dying from it, so it's kind of ironic. So, just make a note though, that he was the first to die in
Karma.
office. Alright, okay, maybe not that, but it's the idea of, yes, he probably should have just been like, okay, I'm gonna take some preventative measures as opposed to just trying just to look tough. Maybe you should think through that a little bit more next time. Alright, he wasn't wearing like the overcoat to like keep his clothes dry. Alright, so which president though became known as a president without a party because he was only there just to draw the southern votes, and once Harrison won, he was just supposed to be the vice president. Tyler, so let me know that Tyler was next. Alright, who was the Secretary of State for Tyler? Alright, anyone remember this one? Last one we talked about yesterday. Secretary of State. Right? Daniel Webster, he did not resign. So make a note for him on page 154. That's kind of the last thing we talked about with Daniel Webster, talking about important things that he did. Daniel Webster, even though he did not agree with Tyler's administration because Daniel Webster was more of the Whig idea, and so because of that he said, okay, everybody else is quitting, but I don't want to quit yet because I'm in the middle of negotiations with Great Britain. So once we wrap this up, now I will go ahead and resign. But right now, no, this isn't a good idea. But point out there are two kind of events that he helped negotiate with the Caroline in Canada. This is whenever there was a rebel group in Canada, but there were some Americans that were smuggling ammunition to them, which you're not supposed to do, and they were smuggling ammunition to them. They got caught, and the British Canadian troops set it on fire. But they killed one American in doing that. It could have sparked a war, but Daniel Webster understood, yeah, you're not really supposed to do that, so we're gonna just peacefully go over this. So make a note with the Caroline, this is whenever him and Lord Ashburton, they worked together saying, okay, we Americans should not be involved in this, but when Americans die, we're gonna just move over this so that way we don't end up with our countries going to war. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty, that was one of the last things I think I might have touched on yesterday. So, this was to settle the boundary between Maine and Canada up in this section. Now remember, we'd already established that the 49th parallel was going to be the border from the Lake of the Woods Pass, but in this section, it wasn't really unknown. In particular, up in here, in the area of Maine, 155. So, they didn't know for sure in that section, okay, where is the border at for it? In particular, in the area of Aroostook Valley of northern Maine, the Canadian lumberjacks and the American lumberjacks both digged that land because there was a lot of good lumber, and so the lumberjacks were getting into fights over who controlled what trees in the section. So even though it seems kind of silly of why do they care? Well, that's their livelihood. So this is the Aroostook War with the idea of the lumberjacks being angry at each other. But again, it sounds kind of weird, but that was the ideas of it. Now, it wasn't an actual official war. They didn't actually like hack each other with like the lumberjacks, but it was the idea of okay, they were getting angry about it. Okay.
Isn't the top of Maine like called Martha's Vineyard or something like that?
I do not know what to talk
Cause
about.
that's like where Hillary Clinton's hiding right now.
Is it what?
Hillary Clinton is hiding up there.
Oh, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know about that particular section for it. Alright, so speaking of though, so they were disputing the border between Maine and Canada, saying where is the actual borders for it. So Webster and Ashburton, they both of them worked together again to say, okay, we want to say, okay, where's the actual border? They actually let America keep most of the territory, so that was kind of the British and of Ashburton in particular. They said, okay, America, you can have over half of this disputed territory. You can keep most of it. We'll keep the top part, but you can have over half of it. That will be our borders for it. So they said the Americans can have that one. So that's the Webster-Ashburton Treaty in 1842. So make a note for that one. Make a note of the year for it, because they're for the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. So 1842. Make a note for that one as well. It also established several areas in the U.S.-Canadian borders in the Lake Champlain region, and there's also with the Lake Superior and the Lake of the Woods. So that's what it's showing you. That it also established borders up in this section, saying, okay, here's some other areas that weren't meticulously defined yet, so here's where those official sections stop at for it as well. So, once we had these two events wrap up, Daniel Webster said, okay, I'm now resigning because I don't support President Tyler. He can appoint someone now that will support his program, and I'm out. I'm leaving. Alright, so speaking of that for Daniel Webster. Anyone have any questions about Daniel Webster? Moving on. Alright, next section has to do with the second Great Awakening and Revival and Missions. Now remember, we're talking about when you have a Great Awakening. Yes.
This is gonna be the last chapter before it does.
Yep. So if you're paying attention, you notice, this is chapter number 3. Your test is tentatively scheduled for next Tuesday. So if you were paying attention, that means that, yep, chemistry and US history are scheduled for the same day.
What?
Next
Yes.
Tuesday?
Yep. So chemistry and US history are both on the same
We're
day.
lucky, huh?
So I may
We're
shift
so lucky.
one,
I'm dropping
I
out.
may shift one, but as of right now, they're both on the same day. What do you care?
I'm going to Canada.
Chemistry.
Woman history, so I'm sorry.
I'm going to Canada.
Alright, so, let me know this is the last chapter, so hopefully if you can keep it up with it, you know, okay, a lot of this is kind of making sense, or I at least recognize it. This is the last chapter with the revival, second Great Awakening, getting into this section 4. So, it reached its peaks in the 1850s, so make a note for that. And remember, the first Great Awakening happened between when and when? Anyone remember? I know this is way back there.
Wait, what?
1830?
Close.
1840?
Is the 1830s to the 1840s. So that's the first Great Awakening. This is the second Great Awakening for it. Now, your book points out that doesn't mean every single person became a Christian. Just that people got revived, or there were a lot of people that got saved too as well for it. All right, who wants to read the quote by Alexis de Tocqueville? Ethan.
There is no country in the whole world in which the Christian religion can retain its greater influence over the souls of men than in America, and its influence is most powerful force and most enlightening for a nation of the world.
Good job. Alright, so let's make a note for that with Alexis de Tocqueville. Just talking about how with America we have a lot of Christian influence. And part of it is because we have these 2 revivals. And America doesn't just keep it to herself. She's used it to be able to spread and send out missionaries into other countries as well. Alright, so revival and evangelism. Your book points out in 2 major ways was the country showing the fact that it wasn't turning away for God, but it wasn't taking the ideas of the Bible seriously. Out west, now, whenever you think of the Wild West, now it's not the Wild West like you think of with cowboys and Indians, we're not quite there yet, but whatever you think of the West, do you think of civilized society? What do you think of when you think of problems? Okay. Alright, so what were problems with cowboys?
What's our problem with cowboys? They like to shoot people, but there's not, the town's not big enough for both of us.
Yes, and so there's not a lot of law. Now again, that's more of the Wild West, but yeah, they were rough and violent. Okay,
We're
Jupiter.
talking about like today's West or old West? Because today's West is LGBTQ+.
There is a lot of problems with the West in California then. Okay, we're talking about like the Wild West or getting into like, it's not quite to that period of like the gold rush yet in
Saloons.
California, but yeah, so drinking, but it's getting there. What's another problem you associate with like a Wild West? Like a Western movie? But that's not necessarily a problem.
Robbery.
Problem.
They used to kill
Grizzly bears.
Okay, I can't hear Chris.
They used to hunt Mexicans.
Okay, they would in some cases because there was conflict between the Mexicans and the Westerners, that yes, there would be that conflict with Native Americans as well. So it'd be the idea of conflict with Native Americans, conflict with the
They would rob
Mexicans.
people.
But there was basically people were just violent out there. There wasn't a lot of lawmen, there wasn't a lot of sheriffs or legal actions for it. So there wasn't a lot of those out there. Okay, I can't focus this. Alright, so that's what it's pointing out, that they were known as rough, swearing, fighting, gambling, kind of what you think of whenever you think of the Wild West. Now it's not officially the Wild West time period, but it sure how people as they're moving west, because they're basically on their own, they would basically do whatever they wanted. And so they were known for just being a rough person, potentially a violent or dangerous person. In the East, they started having spiritual decline to where they would go to church, but it didn't really mean anything to them. They just went, they just sat in the service, and that was pretty much it. So it was cold formalism. Alright, so revival begins in New England. We talked about this with the homework, I believe, yesterday for it. That's whenever it started. Now, New England is at the north, south, or western portion of the country. North. So it started up in the northern section and started spreading from there. One of the major denominations is the Methodists. They were the ones that kind of helped out and also spread it around as well. So make note that the Methodist denomination, this experience of go through the preaching of circuit riders. We would call them what today? We talked about this yesterday. Reckon?
Jehovah's Witnesses.
No. Yes.
Evangelism.
So, no, again, Jehovah's Witnesses, they are involved in evangelism or going door to door. That's actually part of their religion. I don't know if your book gets into it a whole lot later on, but that's part of it, of like part of their works base of going to heaven. You're supposed to do 2 years of basically like a pilgrimage, like a 2-year of soul winning like that. So that's part of their
Every day?
religion. What?
Every day.
Yeah, you basically like leave, and that's how come you see them with like the white shirts on like bicycles with backpacks, because they're literally traveling for like 2 years. That's part of it, is the idea of,
That
that's
means
part of
they're
their
fit.
religion for it. No, okay, okay, hang on, I can't distract you, raise your hand.
I like
Oh.
it.
Okay, alright, you should raise your hand, because again, y'all are getting way too distracting, y'all are way too much for it, so make sure this is the last warning, you're raising your hand. Alright, so, getting into it, to the idea of an evangelist. So, Francis Asbury, make a note for him that he was kind of the leader of it. Make a note, Francis Asbury, your book has a picture of him, that he was kind of the leader of the circuit riders in for the Methodists. Make a note for him. Bible, alright, revival spreads into the frontier. James McGreedy, make a note for him. Now, he was a Presbyterian, but he pioneered the camp meeting revival. This is whenever they would have basically a revival meeting outside, and it was called a camp meeting revival because people would travel far from home to come see it. You might occasionally hear about these about outdoor revival services. That's the idea for this, but it was the idea of they would come and they would camp out, because basically they traveled from areas around it to come to the revival. So it was a lot of people all coming together to hear these sermons. The book points out the most notable camp meeting revival took place at Cambridge, Kentucky. So, this area was known for whiskey, gambling, coarse language. This meeting lasted about a week. So again, that's kind of rare today, but this revival meeting lasted about a week, and your book points out it had 25,000 people gathered to hear the powerful preaching. And again, at times they weren't all there at the same time. Some of them had to go home, but there would be a lot of people there at pretty much given a point. Your book points out that thousands were saved. And your book points out as well that the great Methodist circuit writer Peter Cartwright, he came to Christ or became saved at the camp meeting, and he was talking about it. Alright, who wants to read his block quote on page 158? Brecken.
This is the one that says from 1801?
Yep.
From 1801, for years a blessed revival of religion spread through almost the entire inhabited parts of the West, Kentucky, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and many other parts. In this revival originated our camp meetings. Some sinners mocked, some of the old dry professors opposed, but still the work went on and spread almost in every direction, gathering additional force until our country seemed all coming home to God.
Still good. Good job for it. So, he's just pointing out that, okay, that he was saved at a camp meeting revival. He's saying that it seems like it's spreading all throughout the whole country. Now, he's saying, of course, not everyone got saved. There's the idea of it seems like it affected pretty much everyone. He's saying you can tell that it's affecting the whole country. Alright, the best evangelist of the Second Great Awakening was Charles Finney. So just make a note though, that again the major decade for the Second Great Awakening is the 1850s. So make a note for that. Awesome. Got it. So 1850s, that's the major decade for the Second Great Awakening, and the best evangelist was Charles G. Finney. Now, he was a converted lawyer, so he was good at explaining and saying to people, this is what you deserve as a sinner, this is what Christ did for you. So he was a good job of convincing people of man's guilt and how they need Christ to be saved. So he was very good at just persuading people because he was a lawyer, and God used those kind of skills and that talent to help be an evangelist and to help be a preacher for it. Now, kind of interesting in this time period is newspapers would actually print sermons. Now, that doesn't happen today a whole lot. But the newspapers, they would be devoted entire issues to revival news. And so that way, they would help show these sermons to other sections of the country. Because people were interested. People wanted to know, what are the preachers saying? What are the messages? So, kind of how like today you can go online and listen to a sermon. They didn't have that back then. So the newspapers would print them in the newspaper. Which again, you don't really see that today. Your book points out as many as 500,000 or 500,000 people accepted Christ under Charles Finney's ministry, and countless lives were changed. He also did other things besides just being an evangelist or being a circuit preacher or just being otherwise just being a preacher. That he did other things as well. He pastored churches, he served as president and theology professor at Oberlin College, edited a religious newspaper, wrote many books, spoke against liquor and slavery, and he did it a little bit differently though. He said that if we try to abolish slavery by law, it'll lead to civil war, which he was right for. He said that the best way to get rid of slavery was to have people get saved, and if they would get saved, they should know by reading the Bible that slavery is not right. And so he was saying that would be the best way to get rid of slavery. Now, yes, it is a good way, but unfortunately, even if someone's a Christian, do they always do what's right? Genesis. If someone's a Christian, do they always do what's right?
No.
No. So even though Charles Finney is saying, okay, yes, the best way to get rid of slavery would have someone get saved and to know that slavery is wrong, not every Christian does what's right all the time. So he was right in saying, though, that if we try to abolish slavery by law, that this could lead to civil war. And he's right, because that's part of the reason why the Civil War comes. Not the full reason, but that's part of the reason as to how come it starts up. So your book has his quote as well, talking about it on page 159. Who wants to read Charles Finney's quote? All right, Genesis.
When I first moved to New York, I had made up my mind on the question of slavery and was exceedingly anxious to arouse public attention to the subject. I did not, however, turn aside to make it a hobby or divert the attention of people from the work of converting souls.
Now, he understood that slavery was a problem, and slavery was a problem in this time period. But he's saying it's more important to get people saved so that way, whenever they die, they will go to heaven. So he's saying, okay, slavery's an issue, but the eternity of people's souls is more important. So, yes, we need to get rid of slavery, but also we need to make sure we're focusing on keeping people safe as well, or trying to witness to people. Alright, anyone have any questions about this before we talk about home missions? That was a side effect of the Second Great Awakening. Alright, one of the side effects of it was a lot of Christians said, okay, I'm saved and my neighbors are saved, but I want to make sure I get other people saved as well. I'm going to start sending out missionaries to foreign fields and trying to get them saved. One of the major kind of fields that they went to was the Native Americans. They realized, the Native Americans aren't saved, and we may not have been treating them the best, so we should send over people to go make sure that they accept Christianity, or that they become saved so that they can go to heaven. So he points out the American missionaries helped the natives in many ways, teaching them to live at peace with other tribes, because there was still tribal warfare going on in America in this time period, to support their families through farming and other practical occupations. So that way, if they're living like a nomad, since that is a little bit dangerous, and because if you have something happen to your herds, it could affect your livelihood. So they were saying, okay, here's a more practical way to make sure that your family always has food instead of just following the herd. And they would also help them out to read books, especially the Bible, saying, okay, we want you to get saved, we want you to have practical life skills for it. In many ways, the American missionaries helped preserve the Indian culture, because there was a lot of alcohol abuse among the Indians, and there was a lot of tribal warfare. So as the missionaries went over and helped convert them and helped them see the need of the gospel, this helped a lot of the Native Americans to preserve their culture as well. So that way, they can keep their culture and they all don't lose those cultures for it. Alright, evangelizing African Americans, or how your book puts it, evangelizing Black Americans. Your book points out there are several African American preachers that are also known throughout this time period. Now, I don't really associate it with them, but again, they were around. So, Richard Allen, make a note of him. He was a former slave. He served as a Methodist circuit rider, and he founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or the AME. You want to note the words, but if you see it on a quiz or test, it's AME, make sure that you can see it both ways. So, but do note the full name for it, African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is the first African American or Black American denomination, so it's specifically for African Americans. Now, you could still come as a white American or as a European descent American. But it was for specifically to help out with the African American and their culture with this denomination. So, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. John Chavis, he was a freeman. That means he wasn't a slave. That he preached in Virginia and North Carolina, and he served as a pastor of a church. Circuit rider Caesar Blackwell. This one was kind of interesting. He was a slave, and he traveled throughout the South as a missionary to plantation owners. I looked it up, because I remember I looked it up last year. They're unsure as to who ended up basically purchasing him as a slave. There was a Baptist group that tried to buy him and free him, but they're not sure exactly because of records in this time period if it actually went through or not. But the pastor that actually got him saved, there's also dispute that maybe he bought him and then freed him later on. So they're not sure exactly what happened because records weren't exactly good in this time period. But even though he was a slave, there was African Americans and European descent Americans in his congregation that they would come and they would hear him preach. So even though that he was a slave, both groups realized, no, he's still being used of God. Whether or not he is a slave or African American, both groups listened to him. So he would travel around. He didn't really have a congregation, but both groups, all people of all nationalities, would come and hear him. It wasn't just one particular group. Alright, anyone have any questions about those three preachers? Alright, next section for talking about the influential of the Negro spiritual. Now, just make a note that the spiritual, it combined a lot of the African American heritage and a lot of the troubles that they were facing being a slave in America, and they combined it with biblical truths. So, in a lot of cases, the spiritual was to help them keep their spirits up whenever they were serving on the plantations, not all the time. But that was something to where it was to help them keep the faith, because a lot of the African Americans became saved in this time period because they realized, okay, the life's not too good right now being a slave, but I can still be saved and I can still go to heaven, even though on earth I have some unfortunate circumstances. Alright, so I have a copy of the Negro Spiritual song. So you will recognize this one. This one is probably the most famous Negro Spiritual, but I like it, so I'm gonna play it. You will recognize it. Jamie, I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it, depending on the volume. I'm sorry if you can't. Takes a second to come. Or not, maybe my volume's messed up. No, it should be on.
Swing
There you
low,
go.
sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me
It's not done.
Ooh.
But this part is the African American culture. If you've ever been to an African American song service, it's very different from probably what you're used to.
Why don't we do
It's
that?
fun every day. It is fun. I've been to a couple.
The entire time.
It is different. It's totally different. I would say definitely.
It's also a song.
I know.
Yeah, this one, okay, so obviously what song was that? Yeah. So that one is a super common one. Again, there's other ones, but that one is probably one of the most well known. There might be others as well. But this one is one of those where it's, okay, that's extremely common and most people know at least, oh, okay, that's an example of it. So yeah, making out though of the Negro Spiritual. The spiritual is considered America's greatest contribution to the field of music. Occasionally hear someone talk about jazz music, but again, a lot of people recognize the spiritual, that particular style of music, is America's like original type of music composition. So that one is considered one of the greatest contributions to the field of music. Alright, we'll go ahead and we'll stop there. Alright, your homework for tonight, we'll review for the last few minutes. Oh yeah, that's right. Alright, we're gonna review for the last few minutes then. Alright, so we'll just do just the poem game, because again, we have about 3-4 minutes, so we'll just do just a speed version of it. Alright, so thinking back over it. Let's see. So thinking about the debate in Congress, the idea of states' rights versus the Union, which not a lot of you got the bonus question for this one. So it's one reason why you need to be studying over this. Alright, who promoted the idea of states' rights? Yeah, so
Damn.
Robert Haynes.
I didn't get that on the correspondence, bro.
Alright, who supported the idea of the union? Who was the other side? Okay, I'm washing hands. Go. Okay, it was Quentin. What was it?
Daniel Webster.
Daniel Webster. Good job. Alright, so who was Jackson's first vice president? They eventually break over the idea of the union and states' rights. Go. Ethan.
To start with,
His last name starts with C. Jackson's first vice president. Calhoun is correct. Alright, what was the treaty to where the Cherokee agreed that they would leave their territory? Go.
Let's start with
Treaty of New. I can't feel out the last word.
Oh, it's like a weird
Yeah, it's in Indian.
tree of new, something like, it's weird.
Okay, if you can spell it?
No. I can't spell it.
Okay, you gotta push that though. Okay.
It's like
I'll take
Ichota.
that. Ichota. So, Ichota. Alright, what was the journey called whenever they left their homeland? Go. Okay, I think that was Ethan.
Trail of
I
Tears.
don't know.
Trail of Tears.
That's what I walk every day.
Trail of Tears.
And
Alright, what was the bill that gave the president authority to use the army and the navy to enforce revenue laws?
again?
What was the bill? To enforce revenue laws. Go.
Hey,
that was me.
It was actually Justice. Force bill. Force bill. Alright, who was the president of the National Bank? Go. That was Chris. We'll start with a B. B.
Is it a weird name?
Yeah.
that was me next.
It is you next. It was Quentin.
Boheimer.
No.
Oh, no.
Bibble.
No, I know.
Dibble.
No.
Dibble.
What's your final answer?
Dibble.
No.
Biddle.
Biddle.
Oh,
So,
come
Biddle,
on.
You didn't have to change
I
it.
mixed it
So,
up.
Nicholas Biddle. Make sure you keep an accurate record.
I am. I'm so.
I hope God smites your conscience if you still control. Alright, so who was the Secretary of Treasury underneath Jackson? He helped remove funds from the
That's
National
my
Bank.
Charlotte.
T. Trying to watch your breath. You just gotta move quicker. Go. You just gotta move, Brecken.
Is it T?
T.
I know.
Oh, okay.
Is it, oh no, I thought
I
T.
Oh, I thought you were saying,
I know.
I thought you were saying it doesn't start with T. Sorry.
Is it T?
I know.
No.
I know.
That's a missionary.
I know.
Alright, E was next
I know.
up.
E.
Start with T.
It starts with a T.
I know.
Diddle.
No.
Tails.
Tate? What?
Oh my God. I know this.
T's or K's? Which one?
K.
You going K?
Yeah.
No. Quinn, did you try?
I could see
No.
on the page.
Alright, Greg, you try?
Tyler.
What?
Tyler.
No.
Is it Tan?
Nope. Tawny. So,
That
Roger
sounds-
Tawny. Tawny. T-A-N-E-Y. Tawny. Alright, what was the name for the party that was just against Andrew Jackson? Didn't really know what they stood for, but they were against Andrew Jackson. Go.
That was me.
That was question.
Wait,
Big party. Alright, who was the